Hey everyone, welcome to today's episode of the Decisions Now podcast. I am your host, Erin Pearson, and I am joined today with my co-host and colleague, Rigby Chavala. And today we are so excited to have our guest of honor, Cam Mackey, who is the Executive Director of SCIP, which is the Strategic and Competitive Intelligence Professionals. And he's actually the host of his own podcast that's really great, so you guys should go check it out, and it's called Intellicast. So Cam, welcome.
Hey, thanks so much, Erin. Great to be here. Rigby, thanks so much for the invitation.
Sure. Yeah, I'm glad you were able to join today.
Oh, absolutely. Guys, look, it's these podcasts are a great way to connect with new audiences, so I was thrilled to hear you're launching one.
Yeah, very excited. Well, Cam, you're the head of SCIP, and one of the things that we really wanted to get into today was how we can use competitive intelligence to help businesses make better decisions. And ideally like decisions today. So how can you do them to rapidly make decisions and then create long-term and sustainable growth? So just to jump right in, competitive intelligence is something that it is defined a bit differently depending on the team that is using it. So do you mind just giving us the official definition from SCIP's view of what competitive intelligence is?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so there are a lot of official definitions out there, and I'm not an academic, and out of all due respect for my academic partners, I'm just going to keep it simple and practical. It's competitive intelligence is basically a set of processes and skills for taking all the crazy stuff that's going on outside your company, looking at the information and the insights you have in your company, and then using that information to make decisions. Now, the point of all this is not to make a decision. It's to basically help your company either grow faster or to reduce strategic risk. So how you do that, up for a lot of debate, lots of different ways to do it. Which growth levers you're pulling, whether it's sales, marketing, innovation, lots of different ways to do it as well. But ultimately, it's, using information, using our brain power, using some technology so that we can help our businesses grow and make better choices.
Yeah, I think that's great. It's succinct. I think it's a great definition. One of the things that you said, and Rigby, I think you might have an interesting comment on this too, is one of the things that's key is how do you use competitive intelligence when there's so much data? I don't even know what the term is for how much data is available. It's like quintilobytes or something that's hardly an English word. And how do you take all of that data to then apply it to your process? But then really, when you're looking to do strategic growth, you need that human expertise. And Rigby, you work a lot in that space yourself. So how do you see clients leveraging that as well?
Absolutely. No, you're spot on because there's so much data out there. It's so hard for even someone to think of making a decision and being confident about making that decision based on all the information that they've given, right? So how do you actually synthesize that? And I love the comment you made, Cam, about, it's just a simple definition, right? You look at external information, you look at your internal information, and then make a decision, right? Synthesize and make a decision. So, it's funny how competitive intelligence is the kind of the keyword or the buzzword, but there are so many other types like account intelligence, procurement, supplier risk intelligence, you name it, right? So, back to Erin's earlier comment, if really we have to understand the space, right, we have to kind of take a methodological approach, starting from data collection, right, understanding that data, even managing that big data, and then coming up with natural language processing in addition to human curation before you can actually provide the decision-making capability.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And it's, I think one of the things that we're seeing rather folks getting challenged with is really bridging the best of machines, technology, AI, ML, and all the stuff. Frankly, it's really cool to geek out on, right? But, bridging the best of that with what makes us fantastically flawed humans. And I was, thinking about this episode, guys, and I read an article we just published by one of our members, like super smart executive out of HPE, and probably one of the most tech-enabled companies in the world. But her article was about all about having a good hypothesis. So before you pop open Excel and have bazillions of teraflops, or like Aaron was saying, however much data. It's, what are you trying to do actually, right? And so that's a challenge, right, for not just CI professionals, but like you mentioned, Rigby, supply chain, procurement, et cetera. It's all right. What are we trying to accomplish out of here? Do we have like a growth hypothesis that maybe the data can poke holes in? And so I think not to all due respect to a Simon Sinek, you really got to start with why. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of data, and like Aaron said, we don't need that.
Yeah,
Agree.
I think that's a really great point. One of the things, actually, Cam, if you can provide a little bit of detail on this, what are some of like the most common decisions that you're seeing companies come to, or like the most, maybe the better word is successful ones when they are looking for growth? What are those different teams doing? Because it's different for executives, marketing, procurement,
Totally.
Life sciences versus software. It's all different.
Yeah. So the terrible answer is it's complicated. Because like you just said here, I mean, there's 1,000 different angles you could take it, and so I think just for, the purposes of our conversation, I'd propose this, that whoever you are, whatever your company does, whatever function you're in, you're probably going to need some sorts of CI type skills, right? Doesn't mean you need to be CI expert, but you're gonna have some relationship with information. You're going to have to provide a little analysis. So in some senses, CI has to be a little bit everyone's job. But where can you really get the most kind of bang for your buck relatively? So M&A, right? It gets everyone excited, big headlines, investment banks, make a lot of money on it. So I'd say M&A is a really good use case for CI. Now, one of the coolest things I saw was that you can use some predictive analytics to mine earnings calls, and like this one company was able to literally predict Amazon getting into the media sector before they announced it, just by word frequency and all that stuff. That to me blows my mind. So that has huge implications for competitors, suppliers, investment analysts, whatever. So there's a lot around the M&A area where CI can help. Then reality, like sales and marketing, right? That's where so many companies live and die, is how we can serve our customers and add new ones. And CI can be great there, but it's very, very different. Some of it is we know a lot about our competitors and our customers, but how can we get that in front of our salespeople in a fast, flexible, easy to use way? And so that's like a totally different use case for CI. The interesting thing is that in the CI community, and there is a big one, man, people get really feisty about this. It's, is the only real CI reporting to the CEO and doing, bet the company strategy, whereas this, revenue enablement stuff, that's kind of lower class. I don't agree with that. I think companies ultimately don't care what we call the thing. They say, I think they have a challenge to their shareholders and stakeholders. It's, how do we grow? How do we, create a better customer experience? And how do we, leave the world a better place? And, not a shocker, guys. CI is a great way to help organizations do that.
I think that's great. Yeah. Go ahead, Ricky.
And what got me thinking, Cam, is all these alternate data kind of out there, right? And that example you mentioned about Amazon, a similar one I heard was they were actually scanning parking lots of some of these restaurants, see what the lunch traffic was, and then kind of predicted what their quarterly results could be, right?
That's
so again,
crazy.
It's how you do that intelligence and how deep you can go, right?
Wow. Yeah, that's exciting, right? I mean, and this is kind of the great paradox of where we are, right? I mean, it's the amazing things like you just described, Rigby, that technology can enable. But, guess what? If a company says we're only going to, use public source information from the web to track all this stuff, then all of a sudden, you're basically basing your business strategy on commoditized public data. And I wouldn't tell my board that I'd do that. So I think there is still a very important role for some of the classic ethical CI techniques of, calling people and again, in an ethical upfront way, trying to, learn more about, a supply chain or technology issue. So, it's the challenge of how can we leverage technology in the best and the right way, while also realizing that, there is a huge amount of contribution that, humans can bring to the party too.
Well, I think one of the things that's happening is also with the increase in the amount of technology that's available, you're also seeing more of a integration with like more traditional intelligence gathering, and then also data analytics that's available. So I guess Rigby and Cam, I guess you guys could both answer from your perspective, but are you seeing that the merging of the two is really accelerating the field of competitive intelligence and it's driving to these more new and innovative use cases?
What do you think, Rigby?
Sure, I can go first. Yeah. So, yeah, on the data analytics, that's a very good topic you raise, Aaron, because traditional mechanisms of just looking at public data, commoditized data, or even doing alternate data analysis is good to an extent, but then at some point you have to switch to like statistical modeling and understanding big data, right? When you have millions of transactions, if you're a e-commerce retailer, then your decisioning on competitive intelligence is super complicated at that point because you're now looking at patterns across hundreds and thousands of users, comparing that with patterns and trends across the market. That just becomes outside of a human's capacity. So in fact, I think the term I've heard is research and data analytics, or RADA, right? So that's a rad thing that's happening. But that's my take. I think the combination of data analytics and traditional CI techniques is super powerful.
Yeah, I mean, you said it perfectly, right? It's the combination. It's it's the way I look at it is, CI is very much in my mind following the path that the quality function followed about, starting about 20 years ago, where it was originally, kind of here's this little small office of crazy smart people who maybe didn't, get enough sun, and they had like the research engineer mindset. It was, a little slow but perfect. And, fast forward 20 years later, where are we now? Where, companies get that you need some type of process excellence throughout the business. You'll have Six Sigma black belts in the legal function. Holy moly, right? And so I think, organizations are starting to realize more that there are some of these capabilities. There are tools that can be applied towards all sorts of business challenges, just like data analytics. It's not going to serve every single use case, but the trick is knowing which tool to apply when.
So, Cam, I think one of the things I believe that we've talked about on a previous conversation is the term like professionalism of insights and having potentially CI at the center of an organization. Do you see that as like the right place for CI to be and really drive those decisions out to all the different teams in the company?
Yeah. So keep in mind, I'm the guy that runs the CI association, and actually I don't. So I think the reality is that I think it'd be arrogant for me to come say that CI needs to be the center of corporate decision making, because I think the reality that we all feel in our day-to-day lives is that even as just marketers or operations folks, HR, we all need some sense of what's going on outside us. We all need some kind of analytical thinking and frameworks, and we all got to communicate insights to people. So kind of in that way, it's almost like let a thousand flowers bloom strategy. I'm not betraying any confidences here. We're figuring out at SCIP, how can we have CI light training for folks who have nothing to do with CI, where they need some of the capabilities. Just like, guess what? Companies train all types of employees on Six Sigma skills, even if they'll never walk a plant floor. So I think there are lots of approaches, Aaron, that we see this going. I think probably the one that we are advocating for most strongly is that it's got to be choose your own adventure. Companies got to pick their way. In order for us as the nonprofit to enable that, you have your hardcore center of excellence with your CI geeks, but you have a lot of people who just need to know a little bit. And so I think that as organizations, it's, separating out, when's that project need that person who, spends 10% of their time and they only do win-loss. Great, let's pull her in. Versus when you need, the full-time CI black belt super pro.
No, I like that strategy because, again, the central kind of the COE is absolutely a requirement for any large organization. But then I like the term you used, the thousand flowers bloom. I think if you look at it from an enablement standpoint, I think that's what the CI groups should focus on, right? Yep. And then the actual decision making should be kind of democratized. Right. Because, if I'm a salesperson, I'm going to talk to a customer tomorrow, I'm not going to wait for the central team to say, "Hey, don't talk about these two things. They're going to get acquired." Right? I want to make that decision on my own, and I should have that information available to me. Right? And to me, the CI function should enable the rest of the organization to make their decisions, but then provide the right information at the right time.
Yeah. Yeah, I was at a conference years ago, and it was super fascinating. We had chief information officers and chief marketing officers, and like multi-billion-dollar companies, and it was like oil and water. They were, it was kind of the us versus them mentality. And one of the things that really, struck me in that conference was one of the IT folks said something that blew my mind. It's IT needs to be the connective tissue throughout the company. So in other words, instead of having like marketing come ask IT for permission to do X, Y, Z, they rightfully said that's a bottleneck model that's not sustainable. So what's going to happen is people are going to go rogue, or your tech's going to be stuck in like 1982. And so kind of what's the relevance to what we're talking about here today? Fast forward, how is a lot of IT resourced? You'll have a marketing ops or marketing IT person, embedded in marketing. You'll have a sales ops or sales tech person embedded in sales. R&D has a systems person, HRIS. And so I think there are other models that functions have followed that we as a CI community can learn from, because others have been here before.
Agree, and I can relate to that. Being in the technology function,
right,
and I've heard of organizations fail precisely for what you mentioned earlier. Is the moment you make that a central group, it becomes a bottleneck. Yep. And nothing against banks, but a lot of banks are struggling with that today. Yep.
Yeah, and then the challenge, of course, is it's easy to say, well, this shouldn't be centralized. This should be a matrix or a hybrid. And then, you can talk to people who have like matrices and oh my goodness, they can be tough to manage. So, the center of excellence model has its own challenges, but that can be podcast episode number 3.
I think that's great. And one of the things that I think actually, just to get this a little bit tactical on both of you, is I believe, Cam, if I'm not mistaken, in your background, you have both launched, you've sunset, and then you've also kind of what you've publicly listed as you failed to launch certain products as well.
Oh, sure.
Okay. And Rigby, you, of course, just being the CTO, I mean, you know a lot about that. So how do you guys actually, if we're just looking very technically at like your lessons learned in competitive intelligence from like a product perspective specifically, what have you guys just taken away from that?
Rigby, you want to go first?
I'll let you go first.
Okay. Yeah. So I'll pick an example from my career again. So this is from the context of a nonprofit, but I think the example should be relevant for pretty much any kind of business. So my CEO, my old organization, got really excited about this market, and we said, let's create this whole new suite of products serving this market. It looks just like the market that's our flagship product. We think it behaves just like them, so we'll take our flagship product, strip it out a little bit, and it'll be perfect. Fast forward 6 months, shocker, it was a total cluster. And so, kind of some of the reasons why, there's the classic example that we didn't do enough research to the right people first. And so I think, whether it's done by CI, market intelligence, doesn't matter, but we talked to our best friends. We didn't talk, outside that core market, companies that we needed to win 6 months in. We didn't have insights, beyond basically one segment. So I think, that was failure factor number 1. Failure factor number 2 was that we made the decisions in a vacuum. We didn't really think through enough what would the impact of this kind of subsidiary product be on the flagship product. And so what's that? That's in, an organization of 40 people. That was an organizational failure of person A not talking to person B. So, whether we're talking a 100,000 person company or 40, it's the same lesson. So I think for me, the 2 lessons here are, you got to look before you leap. No matter how good your business case is, get someone to poke holes in it. It doesn't mean that you have to do this, paralysis by analysis, but I think that really make sure that you understand multiple segments, how you're going to do, and also be honest about your blind spots and biases. We didn't do that. And the second piece was make sure you're having the dialogues internally across the functions, across the business units, because one little group thinks it's a good idea, the other businesses or chances are going to have some really good perspective based on their interactions with customers about why it might not be.
No, that's great input. In fact, I concur with what you just said, right? And in fact, to add on to that, when we develop our products, right, and this is even before I was at Evalueserve, this is a product development core concern, is most folks talk to the buyer personas, and that's the input they're getting. And my pet peeve has always been go talk to the user personas, the end users that are actually consuming whatever you're delivering, right, as a product. And so it's a kind of a cultural thing that you have to make sure when we're building products that that you understand specifically those user personas. It could be in marketing, it could be in sales, it could be in procurement, but they're different from the folks who are making that decision to buy the product. So that's one key area, like you mentioned, right? The other area is when you build products, make sure that we have kind of hooks into these systems that they're already used to, right? You don't want to create yet another portal, yet another app. You want to be able to embed yourself into their day-to-day workflows. So if a salesperson is in Salesforce, you go there, you create a microfront, it's right there. Mm-hmm. If you're using an SAP system on the ERP side, go plug yourself in there, right? If Teams is your collaborative tool, use Teams. And to me, designing a product around the end user's viewpoint is critical,
Love it. And I'll pick up on that. Again, another mistake I made. And I will say, I think a lot of CI people make it too, is not leveraging the internal information that you have. And I think sometimes this is not because CI people aren't creative enough. It's, oh, well, the folks that mine our CRM data, they're in sales or market intelligence. And so it's kind of like, you get this, right? Where the scarecrow points to one direction and the other, like in Wizard of Oz. Yeah. So kind of what's the use case? So I came out of an industrial background, and most manufacturers are really, really bad at getting rid of products, whether it's because they just don't think about it enough or, management's attached to products. So what happens is you get these portfolios that are too complicated, and they wind up, they kill your working capital because it's just, you got to make all this stuff for keeping inventory. And what you're doing is basically, oh, we have to keep this product because that one customer always buys 5 of them at the end of the quarter. So what you do, and this is something we wrote some research on in my old job. You look ruthlessly at your own either ERP or CRM data, and you look at these patterns, and you can find deviations in your own account data, and you quickly realize some things, that there are some customers who chances are aren't making a big revenue or contribution, and they're actually giving a really poor profit contribution. But until you actually lay it out and you look at, key metrics, I think, revenue and profit are probably, the biggest ones. You don't realize you're leaking margin in these places. You're, putting all the, inventory out there, which costs you margin. You're not making a ton of profit on them. And so, again, just kind of bringing truth to the data. Taking your own internal transaction data, I found you can, uncover these enormous untapped profit pools. And the rub is CI people are awesome at doing this externally, but so often it's not their job internally. And so companies are under leveraging, that opportunity.
Well, that actually leads me into something that Rigby talks about a lot, which is the last mile solutions. And how do you actually get people within your organization to use the insights that you're providing them, or perhaps even make them aware that you have them available?
So I forget the number. It was something on the order of like 60%. But I think McKinsey published this study about it wasn't like an ERP or a CRM, but it was kind of like tier 2 technologies that companies have that you don't have to log in to do your job. And it was something on the order of 60% of people that should log in never do, not even the first time. And so the reason I kind of start there is you have to think like a marketer here, right? And this is where, CI people, again, pushing outside your comfort zone. You need to think as of your insights are products and your internal stakeholders are customers. And sending an email about a product is not the same as someone buying a product. So I kind of prefer to use, think like a marketer, use a multi-channel strategy. There are great tools out there, certainly, Evalueserve produces a lot of them, where you can get good custom insights tailored to people at the right time in the right place. That's amazing. It's awesome. People that aren't taking advantage of that, I think, are crazy. On the total flip side, going low tech, turn off the computer, pick up the phone or walk down the hall and talk to people. Can't do that obviously with 100 people a day, but ask your key stakeholders, what are they working on? How are they measured for success? What are the business, issues that they're actually trying to understand, not just get me everything you can on this competitor. But, doing that, it's called the Gemba walk, again, in manufacturing, walking the floor, talking to people. That's going to tell you a lot more about what people need and how you can serve them than just, blanketing or carpet bombing emails.
Oh, that's a pretty good idea, because that whole human touch is so important. Yep. And you don't even get that information out. Like if I get an email and say, how do you feel today? I'm not going to write something about it, right? But if someone taps on my shoulder and says, how do you feel? I might share more.
Yeah.
And that intelligence that you can't gather just using technology alone. But then once you do gather, you want to act on it, right? At some point you have to say, well, hey, everyone's on the floor is feeling dejected or whatever. And you take that into your decisioning system and make changes based on that.
Yeah.
So I think the one last piece of advice on that, Aaron, is prioritization, where one of our members tracks it's like 300 competitors, which is just crazy town. And so not a shocker, he tiers them, right? There's the ones you really got to do a lot with, and that's tier 1 and et cetera. And I'd say it's the same thing for your internal stakeholders. We of course love everyone, but some are more important than others. And so they're the stakeholders where it maybe is just the customized push newsletter. They're the ones that get maybe the monthly call, but there's also the small handful where, hey, how's it going, Miss CFO, or whatever that person might be. So again, tiering and prioritizing. Otherwise, you're just going to be caught in the whirlwind of get me everything you can on that competitor, and then that's just a waste of time.
It's ABM for competitive intelligence.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, there you go. Perfect.
Yeah.
Nice. Said it better than I could.
So really the last thing I have is we talked a lot about that you have to use all of this to make decisions, but how do you actually measure the impact of decision making within your organizations? That's something that's very hard to do, in particular within competitive intelligence. So what have you guys seen works for different clients or members that you're working with?
Yeah, I'll list some metrics before I do that. I think basically, when you get into the role, you got to talk to the people who hold the purse strings, because if your boss is the CFO, we all know CFOs, right? You're not going to have like some squishy, I'll no value if I see it conversation. You're not. And so have that conversation on day one. What are if not the metrics, what are the key indicators of success for you? Same thing if you're in sales, right? If you come in here and talk about like, strategic risk is being reduced to a sales, VP, they're going to throw you out of their office. So I think, again, get aligned on day one with what your stakeholders expect from you. So once you've done that, and hopefully you can get at least like, maybe not the exact address of the metrics, but like maybe the zip code. I think then what you want to do is take a blended approach, because any function, if you're tied to one metric, you're dead. I think that's just, it's a very frail strategy where if the metric goes up and down, or if it's not the right metric, you're in trouble. So, there are a lot of good approaches out there. I'm a big fan of something like a balanced scorecard, where you have some, really nice, hard, quantitative numbers. Some of those could be internally, like what traction do my, newsletters or whatever get, so how are people using or at least opening and engaging with the products? Hopefully you have something a little bit more than that. I think you also want to have some warm, fuzzy, qualitative, where, frankly, testimonials were great. Every quarter you go out to your key stakeholders, like this 3 or 4, and, you ask them, how did we do on this project? How we do on that project? What was the business impact? What could have gone differently next time? And is that a hard number? No, but that absolutely attests to your value. So don't pigeonhole yourself towards like this one single metric. Have a blend of quantitative and qualitative, and don't get stuck up on the numbers about opens and downloads. That's fine, but like ultimately that's not why we're here.
Cam, since we're pretty much at the end, I will one last question for you. Yeah. So wanted to end this on a little bit of a fun note. So I believe a fun fact about you is that you've done manufacturing in your past, and now you're working as the executive director at a nonprofit. So my last question, you were a music major, I believe, in school.
I am.
So what
You got it.
instruments do you play?
Well, if I turn my camera, I got my piano and guitar, and I also play trombone. So I'm a weird one-man band.
Okay, well, maybe you should do TikToks on that, and you can do like competitive intelligence TikTok songs.
I should. I actually composed the music for the SCIP podcast Intellicast. So I went to undergrad and grad school for composition. So who would have thought I would actually use it in nonprofit? But I do sometimes.
Oh, that's awesome. That's really cool. Nice personal touch there.
Yeah. Thanks, Aaron. Thanks.
Cool. Well, Cam, it was great talking to you today. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Thanks much for the invitation, and best wishes for all the success.
Thank you.